This all raises a question. Why exactly are these institutions of supposed higher learning sticking with their embattled leaders? Why couldn't those leaders have simply condemned chants like "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," or "There's only one solution, intifada revolution," both of which are genocidal calls for the destruction of Jewry? To answer that question, there's another question we have to answer. What exactly is the purpose of higher education at this point? Obviously, universities serve a purpose. They wouldn't have stuck around this long if they hadn't. But that purpose has shifted over time. Originally, if you go back to the Middle Ages, universities were an extension of church education. Those who completed what was called the trivium, grammar, rhetoric, and dialectics is logic, and the quadrivium, math, geometry, music, and astronomy, moved on to universities. Over time, universities evolved into centers of learning, in which scholars would pass along age-old wisdom and search for new answers. Citizens who went to university were expected to become leaders in their fields and to be inculcated in the values of their societies at the same time. Over time, however, the centralization of a separate intellectual class led universities down two paths. The first path, towards specialization in industry, the preparation of a professional class, the reason that you need a degree in order to serve as a scientist or as a lawyer, for example. The second path was towards social experimentation. Now, the path toward professional specialization has been quite often very positive. You get a lot of very brilliant minds in a room talking physics. You're going to get better results than if they were just all over the continent somewhere. Obviously, the science emanating from our universities has changed the world, and it continues to do so, which is why when we were at UCLA, the people who were called South Campus majors, those would be the science majors, were considered the useful people. But all of this has also meant an increasing credentialization of society in which a university degree is considered an entree to the workforce altogether. Because again, those degrees were not restricted to being in the sciences. They were then extended out to the liberal arts. The second path, social experimentation, has been the way of universities since at least the mid-19th century. As religions started to fade in Western life, and as universities increasingly became battlegrounds for various replacement theories, social experimentation became the key purpose of the university. New theories, very fancy theories of living, from bureaucratic centralization, German progressivism, to broadening of social rights, sprang from universities. Universities became the seedbeds of social change. The new purpose of the university and the education system in general was well summed up by the theorist John Dewey, who's considered one of the most important educational philosophers of all time. He was an early 20th century progressive, very much on the left. He argued that universities were designed to create a progressive citizen, a citizen ready to take part in the rebuilding of a great state unbound by history and religion. As Dewey said, quote, "Education has to undermine and destroy the accumulated and self-perpetuating prejudices of long ages. When social life in general has become more reasonable, more imbued with rational conviction, less moved by stiff authority and blind passion, educational agencies may be more positive and constructive than at present. Then they will work in harmony with the educative influence exercised willy-nilly by other social surroundings upon an individual's habits of thoughts and belief. Experts, you see, would guide the life of the nation." This was early 20th century progressivism. You see it at the top levels of the Democratic Party today. That philosophy, sort of top-down intelligentsia rule, was not relegated to the United States, far from it. Dewey's own thought was an outgrowth of German progressivism, where similar ideas were dominant. It's no wonder that German universities actually represented a center of power for Hitler, as historian Neil Ferguson writes this weekend, quote, 100 years ago in the 1920s, by far the best universities in the world were in Germany. German academics acted as Hitler's think tank, putting policy flesh on the bones of his racist ideology. The intelligentsia, as Neil points out, also have an ugly habit of creating coalitions of the supposedly dispossessed to act as shock troops for their new ideas. Certainly that was the case in the 1960s, when universities in the West were reacting not against the supposed handcuffs of God and theology and religion, but now against the supposed evils of nationalism. Now the universities would be directed toward a new sort of social engineering, toward global citizenship, in which the atomized individual would be the prime mover, so long as that individual declared fealty to the intellectual movement of the time. Thus, Herbert Marcuse, who was one of the progenitors of the so-called New Left in the 60s, posited on university campuses, teaching from Berkeley, a free sex lifestyle in order to create a non-repressive civilization. He preached the end of capitalism, which of course had led to Western power and nationalism and what he called fascism. He argued for the banning of alternative viewpoints, which stood against tolerance for his cause. He called this repressive tolerance, tolerance that represses non-tolerant ideas. No wonder revolutionary students during the 1968 Paris Student Revolt carried banners reading Marx, Mao, and Marcuse. The chaos in the streets of the West during the 60s and 70s was born in the universities of the West. Well, today's universities promote a new sort of social experiment. This experiment is called diversity, equity, and inclusion. Unlike its more brash and open predecessors, DEI makes far more humble claims, at least publicly, to donors. They don't want free love or revolution or pacifism. They simply want more diversity, more inclusion. They want that in the entire body politic. They want more equity, modeled by the universities, of course. But here's the thing. The same people who stood behind the old revolution stand behind the new revolution. DEI is the result of something called critical theory, a belief that all systems of power are reflections not of merit, but of exploitation, that all hierarchies are not a reflection of people being good at things and people being bad at things, but of the people at the top hurting the people at the bottom. And the only corrective to that exploitation is to completely restructure those systems of power by appeal to group identity and coalitional politics. Put together a coalition of the dispossessed to overturn the hierarchy. In this view, anyone successful must be denigrated as evil. If you're successful, it's not because you're good at things, it's because you're a bad person. Anyone unsuccessful must be upheld as good, because, of course, they're a victim of the evil system. This oppressor-oppressed binary is the motivating feature of life on campus today. It is the new revolutionary ideology. And it results in oppression and discrimination, just as surely as the German university's revolutionary idea resulted in oppression and discrimination. In both cases, that resulted in discrimination against the Jews, always. That is why the presidents of major universities struggled to answer basic questions about anti-Semitism in front of Congress. This new philosophy is focused entirely on that oppressor-oppressed binary. That binary cannot be allowed to fall. For if it falls, then so does the entire revolution, the entire ideological edifice that acts as the basis for the revolution against an American meritocracy. If a few Jews need to be threatened with swastikas and elimination to preserve DEI, well, then that's the way it's going to have to go. DEI is the purpose of the universities. Understand, it is not just something universities do. It is what universities are. It is the center of why they exist today. It is not a means toward an end. It is, in fact, the goal, the restructuring of society, because the goal is always perpetual revolution by the intelligentsia. And DEI is the current revolution. It is the entire pedagogy, meaning the way of teaching. In the words of Paulo Freire, who's the chief force behind so-called critical pedagogy, quote, washing one's hands of the conflict between the powerful and the powerless means to side with the powerful, not to be neutral. And that cannot be allowed. And so DEI must be protected.